Well, for more on this, we're joined from Washington, D.C. by our Asia One correspondent, James Gooderson. James, hello and welcome back to Asia One. So President Trump claims Tehran requested talks, but is publicly denying negotiations. How do you assess this situation, and is there any truth in it?
Indeed. Well, on Friday, it looked highly likely that the US and Israel were going to launch a massive wave of strikes on Iran, targeting their energy infrastructure with a view of demolishing all of that. But then, when it came to Monday, instead, it looked like President Trump was going for negotiations. But we have, in the last few minutes, had a pretty damning and long post from President Trump on his Truth Social saying Iranian leadership is unbelievably duplicitous. They asked for a meeting, some would say beg. Talks begin with more scheduled in the immediate future, and then they say openly, proudly, that they're not having any discussions. It's a very long post, and he goes, whether Iran wants to admit it or not, we are in fact talking of a solution to a problem that they have caused for decades. It's very simple. Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. But this is the kind of lurching back and forth we've seen quite a lot from the president when it comes to this war. As I say, just to talk you through the timeline again, last weekend, no strikes were happening by the US. Then on Monday, there was the idea that there were going to be further talks. Then throughout the week, last week, there was a lot of discussion and a few sort of strikes from Iran and strikes from the US. Then on Friday, there was going to be a massive strike, supposedly, by the US and Israel. Monday morning, negotiations are happening, and now we've had President Trump post this response. So what's changed, really, over the past couple of days? Well, I think a few things. Firstly, broadly, this is a tactic we have seen from President Trump before, threatening a massive attack, hoping that Iran will be very concerned by that threat and will offer more concessions around the negotiating table. But that hasn't happened. Indeed, over the weekend, sort of senior Iranian officials have been calling Trump a chicken, going back to this phrase which frustrates the president. Trump always chickens out, or taco. That's what the acronym is for. So a lot of concern, I think, about not only that and where they are with the negotiations, but also about American munition stockpiles. There was a sense at the start of last week that actually the number of missiles and crucially the number of interceptors that America has is actually running quite low, and there's a concern really that it will take years to recover. And America doesn't want to be in a position where it doesn't have the munitions available if another conflict arises. So it is a very, very complicated situation that's clearly in flux. You just have to kind of read into the president's post on Truth Social that perhaps the idea that negotiations were going to be happening this morning was true, but perhaps, you know, he's had a report back in the past few hours that it doesn't look particularly promising. So it's anyone's guess where exactly this could go next, but very clearly it looks like strikes could again be on the table. But a lot of concern for the president domestically with this issue as well because of gas prices. Obviously, the Strait of Hormuz, barely anything's getting through there at the moment. A huge amount of the world's oil and gas comes through that passage. It's been blocked effectively for the length of this war into its 6th month now. And so from the president's perspective, perhaps he thinks, well, I've got to try and get this solved because I don't want it to impact the American people at the pump when it comes to gas prices ahead of a pretty crucial midterm election. So in short, it could be anyone's guess. But I mean, looking at that social media post again, calling Iran duplicitous, saying that they come in, saying, you know, that they want a meeting, and then when the meeting actually happens, that they're not having any discussions. And another crucial point to note here in the president's post is that he references the fact Iran is only talking with Oman. Now, Oman, for their point of view, they are on the other side of the Strait of Hormuz, and there is a sense that both Iran and Oman are trying to sort out a deal regarding that. But President Trump in his statement pointed out, well, actually, the only person in control of the Strait of Hormuz is the United States Navy and our blockade, or as some say, I'm quoting here from the president, the United States wall of steel. Nothing gets through to Iran unless we want it to, so says the president on Truth Social. But regardless of that, not much is getting out without Iran saying so, because they still have a huge amount of drones and missiles that they have trained on the Strait of Hormuz, and it makes ships very reluctant to go out. So let's see where we end with today, because it feels like a lot has moved in the past few hours. Initial hopeful signs that there would be another round of negotiations with Iran, but the president sounding very, very frustrated on that post on Truth Social.
And James, Trump has now set condition of total surrender by Iran for the talks. Do you see a deadlock emerging from this?
Well, it's very difficult to say, but I think that the two sides seem further apart than they've ever been before. The issue here, I think, is that Iran feels like they have survived an initial onslaught in the early stages of the war from Israel and the US. And I think that senior Iranian officials are probably calculating that if there was any escalation again by President Trump, that it would have a huge impact on the region and indeed the global economy, and they could still be in a position of strength. Effectively, Iran has used this conflict to leverage the idea that actually the Strait of Hormuz, which was effectively an open body of water shared by a number of different countries, including Iran, Saudi Arabia, Oman, as we've discussed as well, Qatar as well. Now Iran, because of the fact that they've sort of survived this initial bombardment, they survived the death of their leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, that actually they can use this conflict and the president seemingly being stuck in a quagmire to leverage more influence and power over the Strait of Hormuz into the future. And there's just so many red lines on both sides. Iran wants something when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump wants something when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. And it just doesn't feel like, despite that memorandum of understanding, which paused fighting for a time, that neither side has really shifted. President Trump doesn't want to feel like he's made any concessions to Iran, because of course he and Prime Minister of Israel Benjamin Netanyahu began this conflict, began the strikes on Iran. He doesn't want to look like he is weak, that he's taken a political loss here. But then again, the unpopularity of this war in America is coming more and more to the forefront. And as we go forward, the midterms inching closer and closer, where President Trump faces effectively what will decide his political future for the second half of his second term. Who will be in control of the House, the Democrats or the Republicans, which will play an enormous part in what legislation he'll be able to pass and what he'll be able to do, and what sort of scrutiny perhaps there is on his actions as well. So there's a lot of concern when it comes to all of these things for the president. But to go back to your question, I can't help but feel like both sides seem further away than they were when they signed this memorandum of understanding, and yet the red lines remain exactly the same.
And James, over the weekend, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman spoke to the US president about his concerns regarding the war in Iran. Can you explain a bit more about this?
Yeah, I think this was actually a really crucial factor in President Trump not launching those strikes over the weekend. Saudi Arabia, one of the president's biggest allies in the region, they, of course, border the Strait of Hormuz. Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, effectively the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, spoke to Mr. Trump over the weekend, and in the words of the Saudi news channel, stressed the necessity of prioritizing dialogue to de-escalate tensions and prevent a wider conflict. And that widening of the conflict is a real concern to many countries in the Middle East, some of whom, of course, have already been struck as part of this war. But I think for the Saudis to do this, it's because of a real concern about the war spilling out into the Red Sea. Most of the Saudis' oil or gas would go through the Strait of Hormuz prior to the war, but since it's happened, they're now sending it to the other side of the Arabian Peninsula, straight into the Red Sea, and then often up through the Suez Canal. That is another choke point, and one that clearly could be targeted. We've seen Houthi rebels in Yemen, Iranian-backed rebels. They have been firing and making their presence known in that region. But then also in Egypt, which has been largely unscathed from this conflict, there was a drone strike on a port in Egypt. Now, the Strait of Hormuz and the Suez Canal both being in trouble, both being blockaded, both posing a huge amount of risk to international shipping companies is something that will cause a really tangible knock-on effect for the world economy. It will affect nigh on everything and where all of those oils can be delivered and elsewhere. So from Mohammed bin Salman's point of view, he will want to put forward to President Trump, or did put forward the idea, look, don't strike anymore. Get round the table and try and get the Strait of Hormuz open, because at the moment it's very difficult to get oil out of here. But as we've seen from that Truth Social post in the past hour from the president, it doesn't feel like that return to diplomacy has had any positive reaction or reception this Monday morning in Washington, D.C.
James, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you.